we want to welcome you tonight. The two of us organized this event and two other events that happened last week. One of them is still available. It's an exhibit in the Weitz building on Jewish German lives today in Germany. Please come and see it. We have it up for another 2 weeks. But tonight we have a speaker on the Syrian refugee crisis. Before she gets introduced, I want to just say just a few things about how this came into being, and then turn over to my colleague who will introduce the speaker for tonight. We had an opportunity to apply for a grant with the German embassy in Washington, D.C., and they had a few choices for us to think about in the application. And we chose to host 3 events. One is to look at Jewish people who decided to return or to remain in Germany after the Holocaust and make their lives there. And there's an exhibit there. We had a speaker there last Monday to really think about, like, how did some Jewish people decide to return to Germany and actually experience Germany in a way that makes it livable there. Because after the Holocaust, when most European Jews were annihilated by Germans, that is not necessarily an easy decision to make. And we also decided we need to look at issues today, and that is the issue of Syrian refugees coming to Germany. It's the largest refugee group right now, but there are other refugees that are coming to Germany and to other European countries. And that is another aspect that we felt is important to bring to your attention. As part of the German embassy to make this event happening, they sent us boxes and boxes of gifts to give away. It was like Christmas. Like every week, every 3 days, we got another box, which is why you benefited if you got a t-shirt or water bottle or flash drive or whatever you got, or gummy bears. It's all due to the German embassy that we want American students to meet Germany. The program is called Germany Meets the US Meets Germany, I think that's what it's called. So basically they want to entice you to understand how generous Germany is, and that maybe one day you consider doing a study abroad program there or get to know Germany by traveling there. So that is why we have this moment of fun to distribute these pieces around. But tonight, of course, we have a much more serious topic, and the serious topic is what should the world in general do with so many millions of people on the move, and not voluntarily. Millions of people on the move, not voluntarily, because they can't live or thrive in the country where they're from. And then they try to cross borders into other countries and hope for asylum. The largest group right now that tries to escape from a war-torn zone are Syrian refugees who travel through Turkey into Europe. And Germany decided to open its borders to about 1 million Syrian refugees. As of last year, the United States had admitted 1,200 Syrian refugees. And as of about this summer, it was between 10 and 12,000, so they reached the quota they set for themselves. But that's a limit that the American government is willing to accept at this point. We have 320 million people in this country. Germany has 90 million people in a much smaller country. Germany is actually just about, it's smaller than Arizona, I think.
It's in Texas 3 times.
Yeah. And Germany said we're going to take 1 million refugees. So it's a very different policy in Europe how to think about these issues that are so urgent. And obviously I won't say more because that is where we have a speaker tonight. But that's what we're looking at. We do this also as a Martin Springer Institute. The Martin Springer Institute was founded by a Holocaust survivor from Poland. She and her husband gave a foundation to this university that we can do public educational programming. There's a dual mandate. One is to look at the Holocaust and its effects and implications today, and the second is to really look at issues that are of our concern today. Things that need our attention, because there's social injustice, there's discrimination, there's harm of communities, whatever the scope is. And obviously tonight falls into that part of our dual mandate. So thank you so much for all of you coming tonight. We have a full house, which is really wonderful to see.
So thank you again for all coming and for filling up our seats. This was a photographer who I started following on Facebook because her area and mine overlapped to a degree. And the more I saw, the more I was impressed. And then the German government grant came through we thought this is what we have to have. So she has been featured on the cover last month, actually, of the German version of, I suppose you might call it, National Geographic, Geo. She has been featured on German billboards for humanitarian PR campaigns for the plight of Syrian refugees. She's been named one of the 30 young photographers to watch this year. You can follow her on Facebook. That's where I discovered her through our mutual German connections while she was still in New York. Now she's in Berlin. I think you'll find that what she has to say is something people have a hard time forgetting. So if you speak German, you can come pursue this particular subject in a course I'm offering next semester. If you don't speak German, we can send you a place where you can learn it. Or we just urge you to find a way to become aware and involved of what's happening in the fluctuations of populations around the world, country and world. So I'm going to turn it over to Jakobia, and thank you all for coming.
When will we turn the lights down?
That's
I
what I'm
probably do it now.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for your introductions. I'm really pleased to see that the room is full. That's fantastic. As I'll be speaking tonight, you're welcome at any point in time to interrupt and ask me questions, because sometimes it's sort of a little difficult to find your way back to the question a little later again. I'll be talking a little bit about my work, but also I will be talking a little bit about how photojournalists work, which I think is an unknown field. And I'll be tying those two things together when we look at my pictures later, telling you what some of the difficulties were that I was encountering. So a little bit about me. I have not been a photojournalist forever. I was born and raised in Germany, and I did a year of study in the US when I was 25, and then continued. Then I went back to Germany, and I proceeded starting a PhD, which was never finished in comparative literature. And I went back to the US and started working in publishing, and I've really only been photographing for the last 7 years, and I was photographing I did a lot of portraits, and I've only been a photojournalist for the last 3 or 4 years. When I've just moved to Berlin a few months ago, and when I was doing work in the US, I did a bit of work on criminal justice, which is also a vast field, and as we talked about over dinner, sort of connects with some of the border and immigration issues countries have, and especially here in the US. And I was in Berlin last summer for the entire 3 months when it was actually the moment when thousands of people would come in every day. I think I took this again, good. When I knew before I came to Berlin I wanted to do something on refugees, and when I was in Berlin the situation got worse, and I remember in particular, and I think the entire volunteer movement in Germany started in Berlin, and it was a Friday, and it was extremely hot, and we all knew that thousands of refugees who had arrived were waiting to be registered, and we all knew that there was no way the offices were closed at 5 o'clock, and 3,000 people would be left on the street. So the first day that I actually went in to see that refugee situation for myself, I went in as a volunteer. I called the local drugstore and said, we need diapers, and we need creams, and we need this. And this company has already donated drinking water and sandwiches. So everyone, the entire city came together, because having refugees in the city at this point was what everyone was talking about every day. And I went and outside a building that now everyone knows the name of in Germany, even though at the time it was like, what? It's sort of called the LAGESO, which is short for the Landesamt für Soziales and Gesundheit, which a year ago I promise you nobody had ever heard of. but was now the place where refugees registered, and has now become, it was written about even in the New York Times, has now become a sort of an important term in sort of Berlin politics. And last summer, when I started as a volunteer, I then encountered people, and there were two things I wanted to do this summer. One, I wanted to use an old film camera, a Hasselblad, and it's not one with which I could photograph movement easily, and so I decided to do portraits. I wanted to sort of slow down the process, and I wanted to interview people and find out about their journeys, because in many ways I was aware of the fact that the world is full of refugees, but here I was in Berlin and 3,000 refugees arrived every day. And I wanted to hear how this happened, that people walked for 30 days, for up to 2 months, how they walked to Germany. And the second thing is, so I wanted to experience a lot of I wanted to take the portraits, and I wanted to sort of have long conversations with them and understand. I felt I couldn't report on people and document them if I didn't even understand where they were coming from. And of course, there are also Iraqi refugees and refugees from Afghanistan coming into Europe, but I wanted to contain myself to one group that was escaping a war zone in particular, and also because I was unfamiliar with the territory, I wanted to gather as many stories as possible about one place. So I started documenting, I'm actually going to go back to this map a little later. I started documenting people, and the colors are a little bit bright on that screen, so I don't photograph quite as colorful, bear with me. And these are all the people I met and talked with for hours, and sometimes they spoke English, and sometimes they didn't, and I had a translator with me, so they could tell me their story. I'm just going to show you this. These are not amazing portraits. I mean, they're solid enough. And I sort of, for me, it was important to sort of put a face to a very abstract word that is refugee. And I sort of hope that in the next few years, as these people become citizens, we're going to forget using the term refugee when we're talking to them and about them, because at some point you want to arrive, and arriving, I think, goes hand in hand with no longer, a refugee is hopefully something that you're in a transitional period, but then you will turn into a citizen. So just a few words about some of these people. This is Esan, who's 21. He came from Aleppo. He worked with medical operations, and then decided to come to Germany. And a lot of the young men that have come and left Syria have left because they would have been forced to join the army. And many of the young men I met were students in their last semester, because the only reason you could avoid the army was by studying. And so many of the young men I met were amazing students, but suddenly started failing their exams in the last semester, because they knew if they passed all their exams, the army would come to the door the next day and pick them up. But then the rule was introduced that you couldn't fail an exam more than 3 times, and so people would, fail the exam the 3rd time and basically make their way out that night, because they knew they would be put to use in an army that was killing their neighbors and their families. As some of you might know, the Syrian war is an unusual war in the way that it's not, some people like even get angry when you use the word civil war. It's not a war between countries, it's a war where the government started executing its own people 5 years ago because they were protesting the government. And originally they weren't even protesting, I don't know whether you know, but it started out when the Arab Spring sort of reached Syria. There are a handful of teenage kids aged 10 to 15, and they were scribbling a graffiti on a wall saying, Bashar, you're next, or now it's Syria's turn. And these kids were taken in and they were tortured, and then they were released a week later, sometimes with broken bones, and their parents protested, and the protest was shot down, and the parents were killed, and more people protested, and they were also shot down. So it is absolutely unthinkable, you know, the violence with which this war started. And from day one, Assad and the Syrian regime have killed their own citizens. And so becoming a soldier, because I've heard a lot of people talk about, ooh, but if you're a man, you stay home and you defend your country. There is no defending your country, because you can choose to become a rebel, or you're with the army. So a lot of people, young men left in particular, because they're the most endangered group in Syria. This is Karan, Ehsan and Karan are friends. He's 21. He was actually a Reuters journalist in Syria before he left, photographing a lot of the first uprising. And then he came to Germany, had to leave all his cameras behind, everything. This is Najla. She came with 3 kids, a woman on her own with 3 kids. And she's an incredibly tough woman. You have to be, you know, crossing 10 countries. And she was at risk of being left behind by the large group. She was traveling with a number of times. But she made it, and she's now managed to sort of bring her husband into the country as well. And the kids are going to school and do everything else that German kids do. And they live in a sort of a lot of old schools were turned into housing for refugees in the center of the city, and she's living in one of those apartments. This is Maher, who came and was hoping to bring his pregnant wife over, but he couldn't bring her in time. The asylum process is now a very long process because so many people came. And even though she has she's given birth in the meantime, so he has a 9-month-old son. And even though she has an invitation by the German embassy, I think in Lebanon, the Turkish border will not let her cross into Turkey. So Turkey also has closed the border to Syria. So she could come to Germany if she made her way to the embassy, but at the moment she can't, and there have already been 3 failed attempts. This is a young couple who I met in one of the green is quite amazing on the screen, that I met in a refugee home. And when I did this project, and I realized that a lot of the people at this point, I took these interviews and portraits were taken in late July, early August. At this point, the Dublin Convention was still in place, and the Dublin Convention was a European policy saying you can get asylum in Europe in the first country that you touch upon arrival in Europe. So that makes Germany a pretty safe place from that perspective, because how in the world you get to Germany without crossing other countries? But with people arriving, with so many people arriving, Germany dropped that policy at the end of August, which sort of caused the continuation of many people coming. And as I was interviewing people, all these people that you see here, they were walking for about 40, 50 days. And when they had kids, they would be mostly walking at night and hide in the forests and sleep outside. And every person who everyone was hiding because they were afraid they would be fingerprinted. If you were fingerprinted, that meant this is going to be the country of asylum for you. And already at the time, nobody wanted to stay in Hungary, and the Hungarian prisons they were sort of, there were a lot of stories of human rights abuses. They were separating families from their very small children. This family was separated from their 2- and 4-year-old children and put in different prison cells. And at the time I thought maybe this is a project that helps people not to be sent back to Hungary. Here is Nadim. He was also tortured in Syria by ISIS, and then decided to leave. So all these young men, some of them came in groups and found each other on the path, and some of them left together. It's very rare that a single Syrian would leave. Often people from the neighborhood would leave, or a small group of friends. He had come via Turkey, and he was also in a Hungarian prison. And when he was badly beaten, and when he said, "I want to talk to a lawyer," they said, "Do you think you're in Sweden here?" This is just in one of the refugees' home that was sort of printed on the outside wall. So how do I go back? Hold on, I'm going to do something very unelegant now. I'm going to go back to this map. Hearing all these stories, that was still so unimaginable to me, how families would stand with these boats that were full of water and not know whether they're going to make it, and then walk through Europe, made me think that I wanted to do the journey as well. So part of me was thinking as a photojournalist, but part of me was also thinking I want to do the journey because what in the world could that look like to do this journey? And if people with small kids did it, I could do it. And so I was thinking about this for a long time because every single important publication had at least 3 to 5 photojournalists out on the story, so I was not going to get an assignment. I went down on my own money, and so you have to decide, so using your own capital, you're also using your family's patience, because I have 2 kids, I had to tell my husband I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. And so you have to, these decisions can be quite difficult if you're a freelance photographer, but you need to decide, is this a story I want to tell, how important is this to me? And so I prepared, and then at the end of September went down to Izmir in Turkey, where I knew, and I knew from all the stories, where the square is, where all the refugees find their smugglers and pay the people that are going to find them a boat. And I found the place, and I felt like in a movie arriving in Izmir at midnight, and already as I had found through Airbnb a small hotel very close to that square. It's called Basmana Square, and I arrived at midnight, and there were already crowds and crowds of people, and I could tell they're all refugees about to get on a bus. So it was absolutely surreal to be arriving in the middle of this landscape. So I wonder whether I should show you the map. But now I'll show you briefly. So here's Turkey, and here's Izmir. And what's very special about why is everyone crossing over to Greece is because all the Greek islands are right in front of the coast of Turkey. So at the closest point, Greece is 5 miles away from Turkey. So this is Lesbos, the island you've probably heard most about, and the Greek island that has seen the largest amounts of refugees coming in from the North Shore. And so I went down to Izmir, and then I took a regular ferry, first to Chios, and then to Lesbos, and from there on I traveled through Kavala with the ferry, and then through Macedonia, and to Serbia. At this point Hungary was all closed, and we went through Croatia, and then Slovenia and Austria. And so now I start, sorry, I'm going to do this. Sorry, I don't know how to do it on anything. I'm going to, I don't over-talk these pictures, because I think it's important to take them in visually, but I'll tell you a little bit about every sort of picture as we go along. So here's the most important rule in photojournalism. If I take my job seriously, I can never change events. I can be part of events, and of course these events are changed by the fact I'm there and I'm a human body traveling along, but I cannot ever change the history in front of me. Because it's a slippery slope, I start changing the smallest thing, God knows where I end. And every year there are photojournalists, and the field is becoming more rigorous, that lose their jobs and their prices because you find that something's been removed in Photoshop and post-production, and every major contest, photography contest in the world that takes itself seriously now has photography forensics as part of the process. So you hand a picture in, but before you, and people think it's amazing, before you get that prize, they want to see what's called your raw file. So this is, let me talk about this. So in the case of this journey, it meant traveling with people. It meant I couldn't say to people, oh, can we stop here for a moment, because this is a great area, I'd like to take some pictures. It meant, so I couldn't make us stop. I couldn't say to people, oh, that just looked amazing, can you do this again? I mean, I could do it and no one would ever find out. And there are some situations where it's less important, and some where it's more important, but because it's a slippery slope, you don't even want to set the first foot on it. The only exception there is, I can't even remove a Coke bottle if I think. This would be an amazing picture, but there's a stupid Coke bottle in the front of the picture. I can't remove it because God knows what I'm going to remove next. The only exception to the rule is the portrait. Because in the portrait, I'm already telling you, the audience, that the person's looking at the camera, or you can tell the person was set up, and this is a portrait. So a portrait is telling a different story than reportage. And so this way of working, sort of, especially being embedded with the group, changed some of my sort of actions, and also there were pictures, I'll tell you about this a little later, there were pictures I couldn't take and that I was missing. And there's nothing as painful for a photojournalist to see there's an amazing picture, but you cannot take it, but your life is full of them when you're a photojournalist. So there's a lot of talk these days about photographic ethics, and there's a lot of the burden is on the shoulder of photojournalists, but there's another important part of the equation, and that is the media outlets. So let's say the New York Times pays you to fly all the way to somewhere, because you're supposed to photograph this amazing event happening on that place, and you've got 3 days to photograph it, but the person you're supposed to photograph tells you, we moved that event to next week. We're kind of not doing it this week. So what are you going to do if the New York Times has spent 5 days? Are you going to say, are you going to fly home and say, I couldn't get it? Or are you going to think, I'm not really changing world history, but by making, creating the scene that naturally would happen in 5 days' time. So ethics and the way that photojournalists are constantly underpaid is also a big issue in photojournalism. All photojournalists are underpaid. There's 2 things to know about my job. Is photojournalists are poor, but we have the most amazing job in the world. So go figure, because I can step into anyone's life and they will tell me things they would never tell their family or their neighbors or their most trusted friends, and they're telling me because I'm independent and because I have a camera. And the camera is an amazing tool. So I wouldn't change my job for the world. So this is a picture I took in Basmane Square in Izmir. This is the first picture of this journey. And the reason it's so meaningful to me is because I haven't spoken to this couple, but I know they're refugees. I can tell by their faces, I can tell by the way they carry their bags, and I can tell by the way they carry their children. This is not a family that's out food shopping or walking out with their kids. You can tell the expression on their faces, they're nervous, they're worried, and to me this picture tells a lot, even though I haven't spoken to them yet. I probably wouldn't caption this picture, a refugee couple, because I don't know. I can't guarantee you the information 100%, but in this essay it works. And so what's interesting in Izmir is that when I was there, everyone was selling life jackets, and there were more life jackets that could ever possibly have been produced in legitimate factories. And every person who last year was selling apples and watermelons and zucchinis was now selling apples, watermelons, zucchinis, and life jackets. Everywhere on the street you would see these life jackets. And then I crossed over to one island kiosk, and the weather was so bad, and it's a little further away from the coast, no people were coming in, and the last refugees on the island left, and I found so many. I wanted to find a family to travel with. And there were so many amazing couples, I realized I want to find a couple, and with or without a child, but we can all identify. I need to find them, I need to personalize the story. That's my job as a photojournalist. I make you think you know these people, and now you understand a little bit more what they've gone through. And I don't reach that goal if I photograph large groups of people. So one of the goals when I went down was I'm never going to photograph large crowds of people, because that is the opposite effect of what I was trying to do. And so I found many couples, and they said, that's an amazing idea, yes, we want you. I said, can I travel with you and document the whole journey? And then the next day they would come back and say, we thought about it, it's too dangerous. If, they all know this is the digital world, and anything that goes in in print is going to be digitalized within a few hours and will travel around the globe, and to have someone's name and hometown and age and information and their face publicly available was simply too risky for people. They were worried about their parents, their brothers and sisters, their neighborhood. And so I talked to so many couples who thought it was an amazing idea, and they were really moved, and then they decided they can't do it. So I was crying many times on this journey, because it's a really difficult thing to find a perfect subject and then to have to let them go again. And there was no way I was going to talk them into anything else, because they knew much better than I did what their risks were. You know, if there were fewer stakes, I might have said, let's maybe just try for a day, see how you feel, but not in this case. This is on the northern coast of Lesbos, where boats come in, and you can see the Turkish coast in the background. That's how close it is. I was very lucky that no people died in the week that I was there, but of course people died before and after I came in. But many of the journeys across during the day were happy journeys, and people would arrive, and sometimes they would just laugh and dance, and sometimes they would cry because they realized they had now arrived, and the journey is an absolute nightmare, and babies are at the bottom of the boat, and everyone is wet and soaking. And many families come over with, 20-year-old babies, and the rule is, the policy is the boats come in, the volunteers see from up the hill where the boat comes in, they all race down in their cars. The European Union was not there. The only people who were there, and many of them were volunteers from all over the world, from the US, from Switzerland, from Sweden, from Germany. People had come just to help. And it was, people used their summer holidays to help, and they used their annual holidays. And there's a woman from Denmark, and she had driven a car full of baby clothes down. She had taken all the donations in her neighborhood, and she drove a boat down, drove a car all the way down. And that was her present from her kids for her 50th birthday. That's quite a birthday present. And so it was amazing to see that all these people volunteers, but the European Union was nowhere to be seen. The boats are slashed as soon as people arrive, because the smugglers tell them otherwise they might be sent home. No one's ever been sent home again. And so this is also the northern coast of Lesbos, and that just gives you this is probably just the life jackets from about 2 days. This is the clothes that people shed as soon as they arrive. And it's a little bit unfortunate, the northern coast of Lesbos, where the boats came in, is very sparsely populated. And at night, you can't see any lights, but there's a lighthouse. And so every boat is trying to steer towards the lighthouse, even though it's the worst point of the island to get off the boat, because you then have to climb a steep hill. And because the trash couldn't be collected as easily, I was able to take this picture. And you see there are boats there are these rubber rings, there are life vests everywhere. And this part of Lesbos is called Sonia, and the lighthouse. There are men sitting up there 24 hours, smoking cigarettes. They don't want to be photographed. They don't want to give you their names, but they're sitting there to, as soon as they see boats, especially at night, to tell, in a phone chain, to tell everyone that the boats are coming in and to be ready in case you need to go out and save people. This is little Mariam. She's one of she's part of a twin set. How do you say that? I don't know. She has a brother. She's 6, and her mother had come over. Her husband was killed by ISIS. She had lived in the Emirates, but she was home for a visit in Syria when her husband was killed, and she was also coming over, heading to Germany. When people arrived in Lesbos, they still had to, sometimes they didn't know exactly where they were, sometimes they didn't realize they were on an island and not on the Greek mainland, and they arrived at night in particular, they still had to walk 70 kilometers, which is about, I guess 45 miles, to make it into town with their children. And you were not allowed to take people in your car because you could be considered a smuggler. And so it was absolutely strict. There were police controls everywhere, and it was one of the most heartbreaking moments when there was a family we drove home at night, and they said, just take the kids, just take the kids. And we said, we can't, but they wouldn't let go of the car, and we just had to drive at some point because we knew, there's a police control just around the corner. This is in one of the refugee camps. They have charger stations set up because that's how people stay in touch with their family at home. That's how they can tell them they're safe, and also this is their family photo album. This is in Italy, also in Lesbos, where a lot of people lived on the streets until they could get a ferry to the mainland. And the Greek islands have the most massive ferries I've ever seen in my life. They have a capacity of 2,500 people, and that was not enough to get refugees off the island on a daily basis. And in October, on the busiest days, Lesbos had, just the island of Lesbos had 4,000 people coming in. So the fact that the US has now taken in 12,000 Syrian refugees makes it 3 days in Lesbos in the last year. That puts it into perspective. And when you think about the money, every person is paid $1,200 to be on the boat. The boats have about 50 people in the boat, even though there should only be 8 to 10. So somebody on the Turkish side made $1 million before lunchtime. This is also in one of the refugee camps, and the Syrians were already separated on the journey from everyone else because Syrians received preferential treatment. It was clear that they would be taken in and given asylum. This is Mariam again, you see, and her mother in one of the tents given to her while she's waiting to be processed. It's one of the big ferries taking off. It's one of the families on the boat. So they were in a refugee camp at the border to Macedonia. So at the time when I went, at the end of August, there was a very important weekend in Germany. It was, I think, 2 days after the picture of Aylan Kurdi went around the world, the little boy that had died and had been found on the Turkish coast at Bodrum. And a lot of refugees were stuck in Budapest in the train station. And Hungary was playing funny games with them by telling them they would be put on trains to Germany, but they ended up being put on trains into camps. Now there's a really unfortunate historical echo for this. So people were no longer moving out of Budapest, of the train station, and at some point they decided they're going to start marching towards Germany. They said, the police is everywhere, but if our group is large enough, we can make it. And so hundreds and hundreds of refugees started walking, and they couldn't be stopped, and Austria realized hundreds of refugees are coming, and there were phone calls with sort of Germany, and then that's when Germany came out and said, we're taking people in and we're not sending them back to the country where they were fingerprinted. We don't care where they were fingerprinted. And so people walked, and so by the time I did the journey, it had become very efficient because whereas in July, people might have been traveling for 40 days hiding in the forest. Once Germany said, we're not going to send anyone back, everyone could come out of the open, could come out into the open. You no longer had to hide in forests. But every country was, of course, trying to be as efficient as possible of channeling people through and also getting rid of them. So in every country, you had to cross the border by foot, but then there was a free train or a free bus bringing you to the next border, and you had to get off again and then cross. And in every country, this is the most inefficient process I've ever witnessed in my life. These people had to register in 10 different countries to get to Germany, and it's a messy process. If you don't, how can I say this? If you don't take responsibility for a legitimate immigration process, what you get is illegal immigration, and things happen in illegal immigration that don't happen in legal immigration. So I was able to travel, and nobody knew I had a German passport, but I was able to cross 10 countries, and I wasn't checked once. I could have had anything in my bag. But the lack of the European Union taking control and taking responsibility of the immigration process, the fact there's no reception center where you could where you could say, I'm coming from Syria and I'm applying for asylum, created an extremely messy and sometimes also unsafe scenario. And it is an absurdity of the 21st century that you have the right to asylum, but you need to break laws in order to apply for it. You can't fly into Germany, God knows why. You have to cross 10 countries, lose your entire savings, be at the risk of smugglers in order to take up something that according to the Geneva Convention is your right. I mean, this is an incredible absurdity. And so here we are in a refugee camp about to cross into Macedonia. This is what the official border looks like between Macedonia and Serbia. You have no idea where you're leaving one country and entering the next. It's along train tracks, and a number of refugees lost their lives on these train tracks because they're still active, but it's the only thing you can see in the middle of the night. And so there's a 5-kilometer stretch between those two countries that's officially called no man's land, and that's what people walk through.
Jakobia?
Yeah.
You might want to emphasize that international law for the right to leave one's country and get asylum, because I'm thinking that some people that aren't as versed in that and haven't been thinking about this as long as you might have missed that important detail that you talked about.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether I know the details of this. I know you have the right to leave your country.
Yes.
Even that is violated by the country you might be crossing into. So there's always two parties. And you have the right to asylum. But you have no, I don't know whether you want to elaborate on this. I'm not quite sure which point you want me to raise.
Well, that's basically it. Just that international law guarantees that everyone has the right to leave their country.
That's right.
And everyone has the right to ask for asylum in another country. But what they don't have the right to necessarily is the right to arrive to another country.
Exactly.
So there's this absurd situation.
Yeah. And nobody, and there's also a funny and outrageous footnote to it. The reason, so I think as part of the Geneva Convention, or at least as part of some later refugee treaties, airlines have been made responsible for returning refugees home if it turns out they're not legitimate refugees. So you're basically asking an airline assistant to decide whether you're going to cost the company money or not. And so no airline takes people on, and there are some Swedish attempts to start an insurance company that would pay, supporting refugees, that would pay, you can pay an insurance, and then it would pay should you have to be returned home. But it's just an utter absurdity that you cannot arrive at a place that, according to international law, grants you asylum. It is, it's mind-boggling, to say the least. This is also sort of on the journey. And then we arrived in Serbia, and Serbia was an extremely tough place. Of course, you can say people have made it into Europe and they're already arriving, but people also live in the moment, and especially when you have kids, you live in the moment. And this town in Serbia, it was raining, it was freezing at night already, and people were standing in a 10-hour line, and they weren't even told it's a 10-hour line, and up to this point, lines were maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, and so they're standing in line, there was no cover for them, they were holding their children standing in line, and if you had to go to the bathroom, you would lose your spot and have to queue again from the beginning. It was absurd theater, really, and oftentimes people would sleep on the street because the registration process would take a number of days, and they had nowhere to go, and people would light fires on the street because it's the only place, the only way to keep warm, and the only place to sleep. This is what one of those lines would look like. And if your grandmother fainted, you had to go to the back of the line again. And there was one time in Serbia where I saw, the next day I saw there was a family and they were talking about something, and the grandmother had gotten out, or the person I think was the eldest female in the family, and I asked whether I can help, even though I knew I probably couldn't do anything, and they said, she had gone out, she was dizzy, and she needed medication, and now she wanted to go back in the line, but the military wouldn't let her. And so I started talking, and the military in Serbia is, there's a lot of testosterone in the air, and they're sort of these tall, really tough guys with shaven heads. And I started talking to this guy and said, why don't you let her in? And I just kept on talking, and he didn't want to talk to me, but I just kept on talking to him because he couldn't tell me to not talk to him. And then I said, this could be your mother. It could be your aunt. And he sort of pushed me away, and at some point I said to him, I'm really sorry, I don't think I can do anything. And I turned around and I left, and I think I walked around and I came back and I saw he let her in. And so I thought this was great, and I thought he'd be so embarrassed by this. I was like, thank you so much! And he sort of was really embarrassed and sort of turned around, but that was really great. So here I finally found on the boat that moved to the mainland, I saw some people again that I knew, and they said, Ibrahim, who's in the middle talking to a taxi driver, this is Macedonia now, he said to me, do you remember me? You're the first person I spoke to when I came off the boat. And I said, oh yeah, I remember you. And I said, because I was desperate at this point, I was traveling with no one basically. And I said, can I travel with you guys? And he was like, well, let me talk to the guys. And there were seven men traveling together, and he said, you can travel with us. And so in terms of photojournalistic ethics, it was also quite funny because every time they all said to me, photographers, but every time they saw my camera went over to them, they did like this, I can't come home with 300 pictures of you doing the victory song, So I sort of had to unstage the stage moment by saying, you have to stop doing this, you're ruining all my pictures. Which is also kind of, it's kind of the same thing, I'm unsetting up the scene, But, so here we're negotiating because there are 3 trains in Macedonia. If you have the money, and some people came with a little bit of money, then time is of the essence because borders were closing every single day and you didn't know which way you'd be traveling. So people said, I'm not going to wait for that free afternoon train, I'm going to go in a taxi right now. And so we all squeezed in. And I think I also suggested a good price, which I shouldn't be doing as a photojournalist. It's really hard not to get involved, And when you're sitting in a taxi with 5 other people, you're no longer a fly on the wall. But this is also along the journey. They recover themselves from the rain. This is arriving in Serbia, and it's a picture that originally I felt quite hesitant about showing. But there's a lot of environmental damage done because people have to shed their wet clothing, their water bottles, their everything. You cannot carry it with you. You just have to leave it behind. You're making this journey with a tiny, tiny backpack. And there was one family coming off the boat in Lesbos, and they had a box of, I get tears in my eyes every time I tell the story, they had a box of Syrian cookies with them. And they said, we didn't want to ride empty-handed. And I just thought, the box of cookies is like a third of what you could take with you. And you're taking cookies with you. I really couldn't believe it. But so this is also moving into great colors of the houses. It's moving into Serbia. It's sort of because people were now officially traveling. So these are the buses set up in Serbia. So a bus would leave every 20 minutes, so people could travel home, and especially in Serbia, I felt everyone in this town was set up to make money from the refugees. Everyone was selling things for a lot of money. The buses that were free everywhere else cost money in Serbia. We were staying one night in a filthy little hotel, but once every one of the 7 men I was traveling with, once they had gone through registration, they'd been queuing for 10 hours, they were registered for another 2 hours, they were exhausted, and it was in the early morning hours. It was 3 o'clock, and they said, we need some sleep. So we checked into this filthy hotel, which was $10 a bed, it was used sheets. It was delightful. And then I think we were 8 people, including me. And then we found out there were only 7 beds. And Ibrahim said to the guy, but we paid for 8. And he said, we paid for 8 people. but that doesn't mean beds. And they were also very sweet, because I, of course, was given a bed, and one of the guys was sleeping on the floor. And this is what a lot of the phones are also being used for. They would, in the evening hours, when they had a half an hour rest, they would stare at the pictures of the children they had left behind, or they would call home, you know. This is the town in Serbia also. This is the line, you know, that stretches out half a kilometer, and this is also what the, you know, what happens along the refugee trail. There's an incredible amount of trash accumulating. These are the 3 of the 7 guys I traveled with, who were just sitting right outside a hotel. He's just calling home, and he had a daughter in Sweden and one in Holland, and was going to go to Holland, hoping to unify the entire family. And what was just wonderful in those few days that we traveled together, and my entire journey, and these questions can come up because I'm a female photojournalist, I didn't feel unsafe at any time. The only worry I had was about state actors, police and military. They shared their food with me. They wouldn't accept anything that I bought as shareable items. I wasn't ever asked for anything, and I mean, it kind of, it's almost embarrassing to say, but it didn't matter whatsoever that they're Muslim or not. It was, you know, they were funny. We cracked jokes. They make jokes about their own refugee experience. You know, they said I had to use the bathroom, but the cafes said you can only use the bathroom if you buy Coca-Cola. So he was sitting drinking Coca-Cola. It was a real privilege to just join them for a few days and be able to travel with them. People sleep everywhere because there are no hotels. You're legally not allowed to check into a hotel before you're registered, and after you're registered, you just want to get the hell out of there. This is also Ibrahim, and for Ibrahim we had devised. So we're on the journey now to Croatia. It's the bus from Serbia to Croatia, and I was arrested in Croatia for illegally entering the European Union, which isn't even something I thought I could do. But, but it's because refugees were often channeled, you know, 200 meters beside the official checkpoint. So I walked with the refugees, of course, and they saw my camera, and they dragged me out. And so I was separated from Ibrahim and his group. But I thought I would catch them again because they'd given us the journey we would be taking. But we were separated. He wasn't coming to Vienna anytime soon, and he was caught in Graz. And at some point, because we knew that all the trains coming into Germany were checked. And when you came in the beginning of the summer, you could kind of choose where you're going to go in Germany. But at this point, people were placed, by the authorities, placed in wherever there was space in Germany. But Ibrahim he was a computer engineer. He wanted to go to Berlin. He knew he wanted to study there. And so he didn't want to, you know, end up in a little town with 2,000 souls and no university nearby. So we tried to think of a plan how we can make him cross the border without being found by German authorities. And the best plan we came up with, which unfortunately failed, was close to, so there's one part of the German-Austrian border where there's a lot of tourism around the town where Hitler was born. And there's a lot of Americans looking at his birthplace and so on. So I said to Ibrahim, why don't you go with one of those tourist groups? And when you cross into Germany, you're just going to look like, you know, someone from, I don't know, Chicago crossing over. Because you don't look at Ibrahim and think, you know, you must be Syrian. And so he walked over with a group of Americans who had sort of, you know, look at sort of Hitler's birthplace. And he walked across the bridge, but a guard on the bridge said to him, can I see your ID? And so he had to reveal himself. But both he and the border guard laughed, because obviously Ibrahim wasn't the first person to think of crossing. Sorry. Sort of just before I get separated. This is the last picture I took before I was arrested. And then I tried to get into the refugee camp again, but the police wouldn't let me get in, and the military was quite strict. And then it was 4 in the morning, I was in the middle of a forest, it was freezing, And the next town was 50 kilometers away, and there wasn't a taxi you could call. I didn't know what I was going to do, and they said, you can sit in this little hut, which was sort of open. And I was sitting in this hut, and I was freezing, and I had my backpack with me. And the hut had 2 or 3 UNHCR refugee blankets. And I sort of wrapped myself into one, and I was beginning to feel a little bit like a refugee, like I'm beginning to understand what it's like to be freezing and out, and sort of you have nowhere to go. And I actually took this blanket home with me, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I felt at the time I'd sort of earned it. And then I went on to Vienna, waiting for Ibrahim's group, but they never showed up, and he didn't have Wi-Fi reception to tell me where they were. And after 2 days, I met people again that I had met on the boat coming over, and I had met Noor, who's the mother of the girl with the green jacket. Noor is the one with the checkered headscarf, and I had met her in Serbia, and then I sort of met a couple of people again, and so we all traveled on to Germany together. And this is one of the last pictures I've taken of them. We're in the Vienna main station here, but of course it's not in Vienna. We are in Vienna. But of course, as soon as you cross over into Germany, the train opens its doors, the police comes in, and everyone, and they're very friendly and everything, but still you're taken out, and they say, how many are you? This is the place we're taking you to. And this is sort of still in the train on the journey home, and this is our 4-year-old daughter. And I think this is possibly the last picture. And what's quite funny about this picture is I told you about all the victory signs, and I always told people you cannot do this all the time. But the last picture that I took, I was outside, they were already in the train where the police told them you're now going to, I think, somewhere near Hamburg. And I told them where they're going because the police had told me, and I told them so they can sort of prepare a little bit. And then the police came up to me and said, you didn't tell them where they're going, right? Because we never tell people. And I'm like, that's your problem. And so they were all traveling together, but and he actually, the guy on the right, he did a belly dance, which I couldn't sort of photograph on the outside. But I also like the fact that, because I'm in the story, of course, that I'm sort of, you see my reflection here, and they're sort of with their peace signs. But by now, everyone has arrived in Germany or Sweden, and they've all received asylum. And the next story I'll be starting now is the mother that I just pointed out, Noor. She has 4 children. And she's traveling with 1 child. Her 16-year-old son was already in Germany, but she still had 2 kids in Turkey with the grandmother, hoping she would be able to bring them in. However, Germany has had sort of right-wing pressure. And so it's become more difficult to bring your family in, because the basic calculations where we now have 1 million refugees, if everyone brings 5 family members, we have 6 million people. And so people are now, they're no longer given full asylum. And I think it's important for everyone to know that the fact that you're coming from a war zone is not officially a reason for asylum. You can only get asylum, which is also it's crazy when you think about it. You can only get asylum if you're persecuted for your gender or your race, or you belong to a specific group. I mean, the argument could be made in Syria that everyone is persecuted by the regime that drops bombs on its own people. But what people are now more likely to be given rather than asylum is called subsidiary protection. And when you get subsidiary protection, you cannot bring your children in, which outrages me. And Noor contacted me because she has finally received her papers, but as she received her papers, she was told she cannot bring her 11-year-old out of Homs in Syria. And I kind of think that is crazy. There's always a nice technical, bureaucratic term for something, but when you look at the realities, somebody cannot bring their child out of Syria. I sort of feel, I'm sure there's an international law this is going against. And so as my next project, I want to photograph or possibly even film families that still have children in Syria, because we tend to think of these people as now they're safe and so on, but they've lost their home, they've lost their families, they've been scattered all across Europe. They sometimes still have their husband or their wife or their children in Syria and can't get them out because the laws in Europe are rapidly changing and the borders are going up because there's simply not enough will to take people in, and people always say 1 million, 1 million, and 1 million, 1 million is a very abstract number, and 1 million people is just an abstract number, but if you can tell the story of one person, you're personalizing 1 million. And when you look at 1 million, which sounds big but isn't, the European Union has 500 million people. We're talking about 1 million, we're talking about a population growth of 0.2%. Now that sounds way more manageable than any of the other numbers anyone is throwing at you. So that's the end of my talk, but I wanted to show you a couple of pictures if we have time from another project that I think is really worthwhile knowing about, but I don't know how we're doing in terms of time. Could I do just a few more minutes? And then
Few more minutes.
Few more minutes.
Yeah.
3.5, I'd say.
That'd be a question.
Good, yeah. So there's a photojournalist, a German photojournalist who did an amazing project. He has traveled into Syria over the course of 3 years. He hasn't gone in the last year because it's become too dangerous. And he has documented people who were injured by the war in Syria. And I think he mentioned statistics that for every person that dies in Syria, 10 people are injured. I think that's a war calculation. For every person dying, 10 people are injured. And he managed to print these photographs larger than life and have them placed onto the Berlin Wall. And I want to show you some pictures of what that looks like. Wow. These are larger, this is the longest stretch of the Berlin Wall to the left, 360 meters. The name of the photojournalist is Kai Wiedenhofer. And it's one of the most extraordinary public exhibitions. You don't pay, you pass. 100,000 people have probably seen this exhibition. And it's not just anywhere, it's on the Berlin Wall, on a wall that, that separated people until quite recently. And it's an amazing thing. He's taken portraits of people, and he's also photographed the landscapes where they were coming from. And that's really bringing the Syrian war into a place where you can contemplate what that means for people. And it is just amazing. This is just a few pictures I've taken to show you what this is like. And I think it's one of the most extraordinary exhibitions that I've seen in a long time. Anyway, that's it for now. That's question time.